I gave her my heart, my loyalty, my entire life, and in return she gave her soul to another man. What would you do if the person you trusted most became the one who shattered you? What makes a married woman turn her back on the vows she once swore before God and family? That question kept echoing in my head as I pored over the private investigator's report, flipping through page after page of evidence that shook me to my core. After 15 years of what I thought was a happy, steady marriage, I found myself wondering, what could drive her to look for intimacy in the arms of another man? The photos, the notes, the recordings, they only deepened my confusion. Was it a careless mistake? A single lapse in judgment? Or something far more serious, like a slow, hidden unraveling of the person I thought I knew? According to the report, what they shared was purely physical. No tender moments, no long heartfelt talks, just a hollow kind of betrayal that left me with more questions than answers. Did she still love me? Or had she simply lost herself somewhere along the way? I couldn't make peace with the idea that a woman in her right mind, a woman with a home, a family, a husband who adored her, would gamble it all for a few empty, stolen afternoons. The tears came hard and heavy as I sat alone in the investigator's office, trying to piece together the wreckage of my life. The investigator had left me to read in private, maybe sensing that this was a kind of pain a man has to face alone. I studied every image carefully, almost obsessively, but what disturbed me even more than the fact of the affair was the passion she showed for him. It wasn't detached. It wasn't meaningless. It was fiery, desperate, almost loving. And then came the final blow. I recognized him. The man who had so casually torn my marriage apart was someone I knew, Eric Monroe, a co-worker from the real estate office where my wife, Rachel, worked as an agent. According to the report, they met regularly, sometimes 2-3 times a week. They'd sneak off to a cheap motel just off the highway, and even worse, sometimes they used the guest room in our own house. The private investigator had anticipated this. Once he spotted them entering our home together, he had set up discreet cameras and recorders throughout the house. It meant there would be no question about the evidence if this went to court. Now all that was left was for me to decide, how would I confront her? When would I rip off this mask of lies we were both pretending not to see? I already knew one thing with absolute certainty: there would be no salvaging this. I had always believed that forgiveness was important, that grace was a part of love. I grew up in the church. Forgiveness was supposed to be second nature to me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't summon it this time. What I saw, the way she smiled at him, the way she gave herself to him, wasn't something I could forget. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the complete lack of respect, the disregard for everything we had built together. My name is Jake Bennett. I'm 43 years old, a supermarket manager. My job keeps me away from home more than I'd like. Long hours, weekend shifts, late-night inventory checks. I tried to tell myself maybe that's why Rachel drifted away, that maybe she just felt lonely. But deep down I knew better. No excuse could ever justify what she did. We met back in college, Rachel and me. From the first moment we talked, I was gone. No other woman has ever even caught my attention the way she did. I believed with all my heart that we were soulmates, that we were one of the lucky few who made it. But now, staring at these images and hearing those recorded whispers, I realized, maybe the woman I loved never truly existed at all. I truly cherished Rachel. She wasn't just my wife, she was the person I leaned on for everything. I trusted her with my heart, my life, my family. Rachel worked as an agent for a real estate firm, and just like Eric, the man she betrayed me with, her job often kept her out late, showing houses, meeting clients. Looking back, I guess it made it all too easy for them to find time for their other hobbies. Eric was about the same age as us. I remember thinking what a nice family he had. His wife, Lisa Monroe, was one of the sweetest people I'd ever met. Kind-hearted, soft-spoken, the sort of woman who just made you feel welcome in her presence. They even had 2 kids around the same ages as ours. I met them a few times at company events, those barbecues and holiday parties the firm liked to throw. They seemed like such a picture-perfect family. I guess that's what betrayal really is. It hides behind smiles and small talk. As for the divorce, I initially thought we could handle it cleanly, peacefully. I figured we could go our separate ways, citing irreconcilable differences, and avoid dragging each other through the mud. Rachel and I made about the same money, so alimony didn't make much sense anyway. And as far as the kids went, well, I thought it was fair that Jeremy, our 14-year-old son, would stay with me while Kim, her 12-year-old daughter from her previous marriage, would remain with her mother. No need for alimony if we shared everything evenly, sell the house, split the property 50-50. Simple. At least that's what I hoped. But if she refused to cooperate? Well, I had the private investigator's report, the photos, the audio, the videos. And if I had to, I'd use them. Adultery would be my grounds. It wasn't about being petty. It was about standing up for myself, for the life she shattered without a second thought. Eric's wife, Lisa, kept creeping into my mind too. I hadn't figured out how I would tell her. It would destroy her the same way it destroyed me. But deep down I knew she deserved to know. She deserved the truth about the man she married. And honestly, some part of me, the part still burning with betrayal, wanted Eric to lose everything the same way I had. Just as I was lost in thought, a knock on the door jolted me back to the present. It was the private investigator. "How are you holding up, Mr. Bennett? Any questions about the material?" he asked, his voice low and careful. I shook my head, feeling a heavy sadness settle over me. "No," I said quietly. "Everything's here. Everything I needed to see." The evidence had connected all the dots I didn't want to see before. One of the most damning pieces was a bank statement, from Rachel's personal account, showing regular charges at a small hotel not far from town. It was that discovery that tipped the first domino. At first, I tried to dismiss it, to reason it away. But the suspicion gnawed at me until I finally gave in and hired the private eye. It wasn't cheap. I had to dip into some of our retirement savings to cover the costs. Funny, isn't it? The life we had been building for decades was now being dismantled, one painful truth at a time. After the detective left, I headed home, my mind still swimming with everything I had learned. When I walked through the door, the first thing I saw was Jeremy and Kim sitting at the kitchen table, bent over their homework. Their faces lit up when they saw me, the way kids' faces do when they still believe the world is good. "Hey, Dad," Kim said brightly. "Why are you home so early?" For a second I couldn't answer. I just stood there, swallowing hard, forcing a smile. How could I tell them that everything was about to change? I told the kids that I had a few things to take care of and that instead of heading back to the store, I thought I'd swing by to check in on them. Kim shot me a cheeky grin and said, "Oh, Dad, you know how hard-working we are." Her playfulness made me smile in spite of myself. I pulled her into a hug, holding her tighter than usual. In that moment, I felt such an overwhelming pride, such a deep love, for the family we had built, even though everything else in my life was falling apart. Trying to shake the dark thoughts from my mind, I wandered into the family room and flipped on the TV, hoping for some kind of distraction. But it didn't work. The sound of the shower running upstairs filled the house, and my mind went places I didn't want it to go. Was she up there now, scrubbing away the traces of another man? The thought made my blood boil. The realization that the woman I loved had given me only scraps of her attention, while giving her passion to someone else, stung more than I could bear. The anger built up inside me, slow and steady, pushing me closer to the edge, pushing me toward the thought of revenge. That evening she came to me, reaching out, trying to be affectionate. She touched my arm, pressed her body close to mine, like nothing had changed. Like everything was still fine. I couldn't bear it. I rolled away from her, pretending to be asleep. I heard her sigh, soft and disappointed, and after a few moments she slipped out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The next morning, while we were in the kitchen, she tried again to brush away the distance. Laughing awkwardly, she said, "Sorry, honey, I guess Mom got a little carried away last night." I forced a smile, playing along because I knew if I kept rejecting her, it would raise questions. And I wasn't ready for questions, not yet. Holding her loosely around the waist, I joked, "If I keep distracting you like this, we're gonna end up with burnt chicken and biscuits." She laughed, giving me that same playful grin she used to charm me with. If you didn't know any better, you'd think we were still the perfect couple. But inside I felt numb. Later that afternoon, once she left for work, I started making my move. I had already signed the lease on a small apartment across town. I spent the next few hours methodically loading my truck, my clothes, my computer, even my favorite recliner that I refused to leave behind. I didn't need much. Just a fresh start. As I was about to climb into the driver's seat, my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, came walking up the driveway, her face filled with concern. "Frank, are you moving? Is everything all right?" she asked gently. I managed a tight smile. "Yeah, just me." "It was time," I said, avoiding the full truth. She hesitated, looking at me with kind, worried eyes. "Is everything okay with Joan?" she asked carefully. I swallowed hard before answering. "Joan's found new interests," I said, my voice flat. "I think it's time we both moved on. It's sad, but I doubt she'll lift a finger to stop me." I gave her my new number just in case, then climbed into my truck and pulled away from the life we had built together. By the time I settled into my apartment, it was already pushing 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I figured by now Rachel would have gotten home to an empty house, the realization sinking in, no doubt. Sure enough, around 5 o'clock that evening my phone buzzed. When I glanced at the screen and saw my in-law's number flashing on caller ID, my heart sank. Taking a deep breath, I answered. "Hello. Frank, it's Sam," my father-in-law said. His voice sounded unsure, cautious. "Hi, Sam," I replied, keeping my tone polite. "What's going on?" I braced myself for the conversation that I knew was coming. I'd always had a good relationship with Sam, my father-in-law. So when I answered the call and heard the strain in his voice, I knew something was wrong even before he said the words. "Frank. Joan's in the hospital." For a second, I couldn't even process what he was saying. The children, the house, it all blurred together into chaos. Why hadn't she told me she was sick? Could this have been the reason behind everything? The weight loss, the constant fatigue, the distant looks she thought I hadn't noticed? Was her betrayal somehow connected to her facing her own mortality? When I arrived at the house, Kim bolted toward me, her face pale and scared. Jeremy stood in the doorway, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, watching me with wary eyes. "Dad, where's Mom?" Kim asked, her voice trembling. "She's at the hospital, honey," I said gently, crouching down to meet her eyes. "She fainted. They're running some tests to find out what's going on." The words felt hollow, but it was all I had to give her in that moment. Sam had called ahead, so the kids already knew something was wrong. Now all I could think about was how fast everything had shifted. There was no room left for anger. No space left for confrontation. I needed time to understand why. If she truly only had a few weeks left, we would have to face it together no matter what had happened before. Despite the deep wound her betrayal had left in me, I couldn't abandon her now. As much as it hurt, there was still a duty I couldn't shake, to her, to our children, and to the man I had always tried to be. The next morning, I got up early to help the kids get ready for school. Kim was bubbling with hope, eager to hear any update on her mom. She looked at me with those big, searching eyes over her cereal bowl. "Dad, did you hear anything about Mom this morning?" I smiled as best I could. "She's still resting, sweetheart. I'll keep you posted as soon as I hear more, okay?" Later that day, I drove to the hospital to pick up Joan for a brief visit home. On the way, she finally broke the heavy silence between us. "Frank, I'm so sorry. I can't even put it into words." Her voice cracked, and for the first time in a long time, she sounded completely vulnerable. "Joan," I said quietly, my hands tightening around the steering wheel, "let's wait until we get home. We'll talk before the kids come back." She hesitated. "Frank, are you going to kick me out?" "No," I said without looking at her. "If you're as sick as your father says, we're going to face this together. We'll find a way through it." I knew this road ahead would be brutal, complicated in ways I couldn't even imagine yet. But at the end of the day, I couldn't leave her to fight this alone. When we got inside the house, Joan sank into the living room chair, her body frail, her spirit visibly worn down. And then she told me the truth I never expected to hear. "I wanted you to remember me as pure," she whispered. "Not as someone who had dark desires. I was scared to show you that side of me. I thought if you knew, you'd think less of me." Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "I was dying inside, Frank. Time was slipping away and I wanted to live out my hidden dreams before it was too late. But I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to ask without feeling like a disgrace." She wiped at her eyes and kept going. "I knew Chad. Well, I overheard him talking at work about things like that. I thought, maybe just once, I could forget about fear and judgment. But it cost me everything. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted you to see me like this." I felt something break inside me, a piece of the anger crumbling under the heavy weight of sorrow. "I loved you more than anything," she said, her voice raw. "And after we got married, I thought love alone would be enough to keep those parts of me locked away. I realize now. I should have trusted you with all of me, even the parts one was ashamed of. Maybe we both could have been happier if I had." Tears slipped from her eyes and I couldn't bring myself to hate her anymore. Not when she was sitting there, broken and human just like me. Later that afternoon, Kim came running into the room when she got home from school. The second she saw her mom, she raced across the floor, throwing herself into Joan's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "I don't want you to leave, Mommy. You can't leave us." Joan hugged her tight, burying her face in Kim's hair. "We all have to go someday, sweetie," she whispered through her own tears. "But I'll always be with you. No matter where I am." The room was thick with grief and love, tangled together in a way that words could never fully explain. "I won't let that happen," I whispered fiercely as Joan clung tightly to Kim, who was sobbing against her chest. I turned to Jeremy, whose face was streaked with silent tears. I pulled him into my arms, holding him close, feeling his whole body trembling with confusion and fear. "What's wrong with Mom?" he managed to choke out. I swallowed the lump in my throat and said quietly, "It's cancer, son. Stage 4. The words felt foreign in my mouth, like they belonged to someone else's nightmare. The doctors, they can't do anything now. The kids clung to us, and for a few fragile minutes we just stood there, a broken family trying desperately to stay whole. Somewhere deep down, though, another part of me stirred, the part that remembered Chad and his role in all of this. Was it even worth it anymore to blow up his happy little life? Maybe, but not yet. He could sweat a little longer while I figured out what to do. Sunday evening brought a different kind of ambush. Jeanette had been acting strangely all weekend. She kept brushing me off with forced smiles and fake reassurances, but I knew her better than that. There was something she wasn't telling me, and it gnawed at me with every passing hour. As we got ready for bed, I couldn't keep it in anymore. "Jeanette," I said, turning to her, "we need to have a serious conversation." Her shoulders stiffened. She turned slowly, and before I could even finish my thought, tears welled up in her eyes. "I swear, Frank, I've never been unfaithful to you," she cried, the words tumbling out between sobs. "I would never cheat on you. How can you think that? How can you say something so hurtful?" I stared at her, trying to make sense of the scene unfolding before me. "Maybe you forgot to mention," I said bitterly, "that you've been having cozy lunches with another man. Maybe you left out the part where he invited you, a married woman, on a skiing trip to Colorado. And maybe you didn't think it was important to mention that we haven't had any real intimacy for over a month." She wiped at her face, trying to compose herself. "It's not what you think, Frank. I swear it's not like that. He's just a nice guy. His girlfriend bailed on him, and he didn't want the ticket to go to waste." Her excuses only made the anger simmer hotter under my skin. I slammed my fist down on the table, making her jump. "I'm not jealous," I barked. "I'm furious. Because in all the years we've known each other, all 4 years of marriage, not once have you ever mentioned wanting to ski. Not once. And now, out of nowhere, you're suddenly desperate to hit the slopes with some guy you just happened to meet in the cafeteria? And you have the nerve to wonder why I'm suspicious." She stared at me, stunned into silence, her chest heaving with shallow breaths. Meanwhile, in the background, another plan was unfolding. Earlier, I had asked Julio, a coworker I trusted, to do a little digging. At 5:44 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Julio. "Boss, it's me. I got the photo," he said. He told me he had caught sight of Jensen, the man in question, talking to Jeanette, though he couldn't get close enough to hear what they were saying. Later that evening, just as I was pulling into the garage, Julio called again. "Boss, I've been following him. He left the building around 3 p.m., went to the subway station. It was packed. I couldn't get too close without spooking him, but he looked nervous. Real nervous. Sat there clutching his briefcase like he thought we were about to mug him." I thanked Julio, telling him I owed him one. And in that moment, all the pieces started fitting together. Her sudden new interest. Her distance. The ski trip. The way she recoiled when I confronted her. Maybe she hadn't technically crossed the line yet. But she had been standing on the edge, toes hanging over the side, ready to jump. And now there was no pretending anymore. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I yelled, louder than I meant to, as the flood of anger and betrayal finally boiled over. The name Jensen burned in my mind like a brand. I later found out, through Julio's relentless digging, that Jensen had pled guilty to a reduced charge of sexual assault a few years back. He served just 24 months in prison. But due to overcrowding, he didn't even finish his full sentence. He was out after only 14 months. And it didn't end there. After his release, Jensen had gone looking for his ex-wife, and when he found her, he beat her so severely that she was hospitalized for nearly a month. That was the kind of man my wife had gotten tangled up with. Even more disturbingly, Julio confirmed all of this through public criminal records. Jensen's address was listed, his file full of red flags. But somehow, despite all that violence, his ex-wife still defended him. A heartbreaking testament to the twisted loyalty abuse can breed. Trying to piece together more of the truth, I called the phone numbers Jensen had provided for a few couples he supposedly knew. Each call ended the same way, an automated voice telling me the number was disconnected. I tried searching their names online, scouring Facebook and other sites for any trace of them. Nothing. It was like they didn't even exist. Finally, with a heavy heart, I messaged Julio again. "Sorry, boss," he wrote back. "There's no record of those people. None of it checks out. If that's even his real name, everything he told you was a lie." Reading those words felt like the final nail being driven into the coffin of my trust. I sat there in silence for a long while, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I realized then that there was no way I was going to let Jeanette go through with this madness. I won't allow it, I said out loud to myself, the conviction solidifying in my chest. Foolishly, a part of me had hoped that once Jeanette saw how suspicious this all was, she would snap out of it. But instead, I found her crying alone in the bedroom. My mind and heart battled furiously. The logical side of me wanted to let her sit in the mess she had made, wanted her to feel every ounce of the pain she'd caused. But the emotional side, the side that still remembered the woman I fell in love with, wanted to pull her out of the wreckage and fix what was left. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, restless, torn between two impossible choices. By morning I had decided on a compromise. I got up before dawn, moving quietly around the house. When I approached Jeanette to say goodbye before work, she barely acknowledged me, her anger still smoldering from the night before. Out of instinct, maybe desperation, I pulled out my phone and snapped a quick photo of her. "What are you doing?" she snapped, startled. "Why would you do that?" "So the police have a recent photo of you," I said quietly. "In case you decide to do something reckless." She stared at me, stunned and furious, but didn't say another word. Later that day I met Julio to thank him. "Couldn't have done this without you," I said, meaning every word. He gave me a small nod. "Anytime, boss." Things escalated quickly after that. When Jeanette tried boarding her flight, the one that was supposed to take her to Colorado with Jensen, a TSA agent flagged her bag for a random inspection. I had hidden a small corkscrew deep in one of the zippered pockets, subtle enough to get her stopped, not enough to get her into real trouble. It was a desperate move, but I needed more time. They rummaged through her luggage, found the corkscrew and confiscated it. No real harm done. But it delayed her just enough for Julio, who was tailing Jensen, to track him down properly. And what we found broke the last fragile hope I had been clinging to. At 8:03 p.m. Julio called again. "Boss," he said, "you're not gonna believe this. Jensen's real name isn't even Jensen. It's Robert Jensen, and he's wanted for skipping out on a series of court-ordered payments. He's been using fake names to hide from warrants. Julio even saw him causing a scene at the airport, demanding to be seated next to his girlfriend." Hearing those words, knowing he was calling Jeanette that, made my stomach twist into knots. I could hardly breathe as tears burned my eyes. How had it come to this? Julio's last words that night stuck with me. "Boss, it's over. You've done everything you could. It's time to let her go." And deep down I knew he was right. She stood there trembling, hoping, I think, for a warm hug. I opened my arms wide, offering her comfort despite everything. But Jeanette didn't move. She stayed frozen, her head bowed low, staring at the floor as though the ground might open up and swallow her whole. Not a single word came out of her mouth. The situation spiraled even further out of control when the police escorted Robert Jensen off the plane. His angry screams echoed across the terminal, and every word out of his mouth seemed to pierce through me like a dagger. Over and over he shouted my wife's name, making sure the entire world knew exactly who he was there for. I turned to Jeanette, pleading with my eyes, begging her to deny it. To tell everyone he was lying. To say it was all a horrible mistake. But she didn't. She just turned away from me, shoulders slumped, her silence louder than any confession she could have spoken. Later, once things calmed down a little, I found her sitting stiffly in the corner of the airport security office. I took a deep breath and spoke words I knew we couldn't take back. "I was willing to tear up the divorce papers," I said quietly, "if you had the courage to sincerely apologize. But after today..." I shook my head, feeling the final pieces of my love for her crumbling inside me. "I'm sorry, Jeanette. I'm moving forward with the divorce." The detective who had been quietly observing the scene pulled me aside afterward. He warned me to keep my decision, and the evidence I had, close to my chest until everything was finalized. He was right. This wasn't over yet. A few minutes later, Jeanette stumbled into the room, her face buried behind trembling hands. She looked like a ghost of the woman I had once married, fragile, broken, and weighed down by a shame too heavy for her to carry. She collapsed into the chair across from me, her body racked with sobs. I watched her for a long moment, my heart torn between sorrow and bitterness. This wasn't the ending I had imagined. Not for us. Not for the family we had tried so hard to build. Time moved on like it always does, whether you're ready or not. Back home, life tried to stitch itself back together in quiet ways. Holly, my teenage daughter from my first marriage, was getting ready to go to the mall when I returned home one Saturday. She smiled warmly and asked if I needed anything, A simple kindness that somehow felt monumental after the week I'd had. Normally, I'd worry about overspending, she was a teenager after all, but Holly had always been responsible with her money. Independent. Mature beyond her years. I smiled and waved her off, sinking into the couch to watch some football. Before leaving, Holly poked her head back in and teased, "Don't stay glued to the TV all day, Dad. Make sure you spend some time with the little ones, okay?" I chuckled and promised I would. Her words stuck with me more than she probably realized. A few hours later she came back carrying only one shopping bag, proof of her practicality. She mentioned she'd picked up some stuff we needed for the house. Simple things. Normal things. Life inching forward. But not all parts of my story were clean or easy. Just a few years earlier, after my first marriage collapsed, I had spiraled hard. Carol, my first wife, had loved me deeply and I destroyed that trust through foolishness. Cheating. An act of selfishness I justified as harmless. Just a friendship, just fun. But in reality, it was a betrayal that tore everything apart. A year after the divorce, I packed my life into a few boxes and left Atlanta behind, starting fresh in Seattle. It was there that I met Holly's mother. Holly, not just a daughter's name now, but a woman who taught me what rebuilding truly looked like. When I met Holly, I courted her honestly. I told her the ugly truth about my past, the mistakes I made, the vows I broke. I didn't hide it because I didn't want to build our life together on lies. When we married, I made a silent, ironclad promise. I would never repeat the mistakes of my past. No matter what temptations came my way, I would be loyal. I would be better. And for 4 years I lived up to that vow. I stayed faithful to Holly even when temptation wore a familiar smile, like Karen Bates and others who crossed my path. I wasn't the smoothest guy. I didn't have movie star looks or a silver tongue. But I had something stronger, the will to change. As far as I know, Holly stayed true to me too. I made my way upstairs and into the kitchen, still feeling the heavy weight of everything that had happened. There, leaning casually against the counter, was Jake, our private investigator. I didn't have the highest opinion of the man, and to be honest, he seemed to feel the same way about me. His condescending tone had always rubbed me the wrong way. Still, I had to admit, Jake looked sharp, kept himself fit, and carried himself with the calm confidence of a man who knew exactly how to play his cards. As that begrudging thought crossed my mind, I caught Jake watching me carefully, patiently waiting. He wasn't going to rush. He was waiting for me to be ready to hear whatever bombshell he had loaded in the chamber. I gave him a small nod, signaling that I was ready. What he said next nearly knocked the air out of me. He explained that not only had he gathered enough evidence to destroy Jensen's credibility, but he also had documented minutes from an old court session. Proof that Jensen had a violent past, one he had worked hard to hide. Jake was even willing to testify in court if necessary, offering to slash his fee just to make sure these people were held accountable. He said the running costs of further surveillance would be almost half of what he had originally estimated. It didn't take long for me to decide. Instead of dragging things out even further, I asked Jake to play me the recordings he'd gathered. I needed the truth, raw and unfiltered. Meanwhile, things were heating up elsewhere. Holly, my rock in so much of this, called, her voice shaky, asking why I had been talking about divorce. She was scared, confused. I told her bluntly that we needed to talk in person and hung up before she could ask anything more. 26 minutes later, Holly showed up in the doorway of our home, her face red and puffy from crying. She didn't even bother with hello. "Where's Sam and Barbara?" she asked immediately, her voice cracking. "They're staying with your parents," I said quietly, knowing the words would hit harder than anything else. And then I told her. About Derek Turner. About everything I had uncovered. The look on Holly's face was like I had physically struck her. The shock, the devastation, it was all there, plain as day. She staggered back a step, needing a moment to process what she was hearing. She opened her mouth a few times but couldn't seem to find the right words. Finally, she asked the question that had been hanging between us. "What happens now?" she whispered. I rubbed my face, feeling the exhaustion settle into my bones. "That depends," I said. "Do you still want to be married to me? Are you willing to end this thing with Turner, once and for all?" For a moment, there was only silence between us, thick and suffocating. And then, in a trembling voice, Holly answered. "Yes," she said fiercely. "I want to be your wife, Frank. I've never doubted it. And I'll never see Derek again, I swear it." Tears welled in her eyes as she crossed the room and sank into my lap, pressing her head against my chest. Her body shook with the force of her sobs. "I'm so sorry," she whispered again and again. Each word chipped away at the anger I had been holding on to. Life moved on, slowly and painfully. We had a long road ahead of us. Counseling sessions, difficult conversations, rebuilding trust brick by brick. But at least there was a road. At least there was a chance. Holly's company had its own struggles too. Turns out they had to deal with violators internally, and one of our consultants, the same one who helped us uncover the truth, played a key role in cleaning things up. It was a small win in the middle of a war we were still fighting. But Holly was blindsided when, during one of our first marriage counseling sessions, I confessed something else. Something I hadn't wanted to say but knew I had to. I admitted that back during the darker days of our marriage, before everything exploded, I had come dangerously close to cheating on her too. It was stupid. Arrogant. The same foolish pride that had destroyed my first marriage. But I had pulled back before crossing the line, determined not to repeat the mistakes of my past. I needed Holly to know everything. Because rebuilding meant no more secrets. She needed to understand that while she wasn't the only one who made mistakes, we still had the power, both of us, to choose differently this time.